So we need to know as a community and as the organizers in this community what we need to start working on at this point.
That's a very good question, and we have been working very closely with the Alderman's office of the 8th Ward, who's been extremely helpful to help get some of those businesses remediated, the word that I'll use. And I encourage individuals and community organizations to continue to reach out to the Alderman's office and voice concerns about any of the activities over there that are not beneficial to the future of any here. That's what everybody can do.
Let me interject for a second. I want to interject just for 1 second, because some of the times we're sitting in the audience and we see these natural connections, and from what folks are saying, recently the South Shore Chamber of Commerce had a forum around commercial corridor development. And what I want to do at this point, Val, don't try to block her. What I want to do now is invite Ms. Tiana Worth to come to the stage for a second here. There's a conversation to be had about this piece that you're talking about now, linking these elected officials in this conversation. Now, can we give her a very small round of applause for the work she's done already?
Good afternoon. Tiana Worth, as you said. Most people in this room have worked very closely with the Chamber and on ideas that we had in reviving 79th Street, 75th Street, 71st Street corridor. Thank goodness for Mr. Gary. He's working from the top, and that's when we need somebody from the top that's going to link these together. We have talked about doing a Main Street grant. The Main Street grant would link us with 79th Street, 75th, and 71st. That Main Street grant is, it designates our corridor from 79th Street at the Dan Lyons to Lakeside to allow us to have, can you hear me? To allow us to have redevelopment and a Main Street designation that would go from Dan Ryan all the way to the Lakeside development. We do the same thing for 71st Street and 75th Street, which would revitalize our corridor. We can only get that buy-in with the elected officials. All the elected officials have to sign a letter saying that they want it to be Main Street. Last year we had 2 of them that said, yes, we want to do this. But we do also need to go higher up. It's a grant the designation is done by national, which gives you national funds, and is designated Main Street by the state level. That right now, that program is on hold by Governor Warner. The people who applied for it last year haven't been designated yet. So we're waiting for their designation to take place. There has not been any African American community designated a Main Street in the state of Illinois. None. And yes, ma'am. A Main Street is where you have a designation for that corridor to run along from like Dan Ryan. I'm give an example. From Dan Ryan to South Shore Drive for the Lake Street development, and your lights, you get money for preservation. You get money to help you with lights. You have an agency that's set up to do nothing else but do that redevelopment, which would link with the Regal, and would give us a landmark status saying this is what we do, and this is our corridor. It would change us totally and completely without regentrifying. And that's the idea. And I didn't want to say this because I had an opportunity to really sit down with Mr. Gary and talk to him. We talked to the community about it a year and a half ago. We were supposed to submit. We didn't submit because I didn't get all the buy-in I needed. I'd like to be able to have all the buy-in from the elected officials from the top. And this way we could then glide through this and be that designated area.
What do we need to do in terms of getting our officials on board? Do we need to write letters? Do we need to do petitions? Do we need to email? Because if we need the signatures of officials that we have put in office, then we can press them down.
Well, now, what we need to do is we look at the application that we put out. They want to have specific committees that write specific things. The idea was when we pulled it together, I said, well, if I have all the committees, I can write it. Once I looked at it, we went down to state. The state of Illinois informed me that I could write it, but I have to have all of those individual committees stand up and read it. They have to say that this is what we want, this is what we want to move forward, not one individual can do that. So therefore, we would need the committees to say, fine, this is what we want, help design the idea, help design those corridors, work with the businessmen in that area, and have the buy-in from all of those different facets. With that and the elected official's signature on this form, we're a shoo-in. We thought we were going to compete against Pullman. Pullman went another route. They didn't go Main Street. They went historic preservation. So now we have no African American Main Street at all in the state, and that's what I'm pushing for. I think that would culturally enrich our neighborhood and will change everything and start us on a path that Mr. Gary is talking about.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you started writing, I couldn't hear you. Are you doing it for 79th Street corridor, 71st and 75th?
Yes. All three corridors. But I can't write it all by myself. They do not want that. They do not want it to be an individual buy-in. They want a community buy-in in every facet of it. Thank goodness for the planning coalition. They pulled together these teams in each of those areas. Now we can take the application when it hits the street again to the planning coalition and say, okay, fine, this is what we need. How many of you want to move forward with this? And their writers in those particular areas where everybody stays in their lane. Then you go to the state of Illinois and say, this is what we do, this is what we want for our community, this is our vision, and it's going to be based on where Lake Street is ended. Lake Street development is supposed to be a 40-year plan. This will help us move in that direction, and Mr. Gary will help us solidify that from the top.
All right. I didn't want to put him in that position without talking to him, but there.
Did you want to respond to that first, or do you want to move on? One more comment?
It's really interesting what you just said, and the governmental part when it comes to this. As you talked about, the Regal Theater, the Gardeners put millions of dollars in, and then the government took over. And ironically today, just today, yesterday actually, Danny Davis went in to try to get his cousin out of jail for the millions of dollars that they took out of the project. So I have two questions. First question is, what's the project look like now after they had it over the last 2 years and what they did or didn't do to it? And the second question is, do you really want a governmental partner? You actually piqued my interest when you said, I'm a private entity and don't want that public oversight of what's going on. Because the reality is, a governmental entity has been helping us for the last 40 years here, and you see where we are. I think it's at a point where we need to take control of it ourselves and bring our dollars to this and change the situation.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, then we're going to open it up for announcements.
So as to the condition of the theater, it's beautiful. Inside, it's gorgeous. It looks even better than the pictures. The pictures on the internet don't justice. As for working with the city, I want to work with the city. I love the city. I want the city supportive. The city has been supportive, and I'm sure they will continue to be supportive. And that's our goal, to forge a partnership that is mutually beneficial. We are a private entity, and we need to work with the city because the city has resources that we don't have.
If you're no longer a private entity,
We are.
you become something different from a private entity.
Well, yes and no, but when you can work with the city in a cooperative fashion, things do work out. Okay, and it's a long road. So long, it's not gonna happen overnight. But that's our goal.
And I'll just say this, Joe is going to be on our arts and culture committee. He's already working with those folks and people that have expertise in arts and culture. But he'll also have the community behind him. So sometimes the city is different when there's a community behind you versus you're just an individual that's opened up something, just to add to that, because we're building block clubs and all kinds of things. That's going to be a hard force to be reckoned with at the end of the day. Sorry, that's just the organizer in me. Just one question, make it quick.
So
so it won't be a question, it'll be safe.
Okay.
Sneak it in. I'm Juwan, I'm along with the Kimball Oakland Community Organization. Just want to encourage you to continue to work with the Planning Coalition and the CBA that's being developed. Because I was on a tour with, it was just 3 of us on a tour with Lakeside Development. A guy from Barrington, another guy from Winnetka, and myself. And they had a sidebar about 79th Street and how they needed to figure out what to do about 79th Street because they didn't want to see the blight as they drove in and out of Lakeside Development. And so from my experience in Kenwood, you know, seeing people who would live there for generations sacrifice to develop it and then end up getting pushed out. I know as a South Shore resident, I would hate for that to happen over this way.
Okay, so we're going to take this phase into community announcements. Are there any community announcements? 'Cause I have one. So, first of all, let's give everyone a round of applause. Joe, thank you very much. We're looking forward to working with you and the community. Does anyone have any announcements? Okay. All right, first of all, again, happy Father's Day to all the men. All the men in the community, we salute you. Tomorrow is Real Men Cook Day. It's our 26th annual. My son took it over 3 years ago, so he needs your support. It is a whole new generation of people, and what I just would suggest, because many of you know that 20 years of the 26th Real Men Cook was held in various places in South Shore, starting with the Museum of Science and Industry, but it's a new generation. He's 38, and his peers are the ones that are cooking and serving. And so if you can't come or don't feel like walking or being outside, please consider buying a ticket for a couple of those guys who you saw whose pants was hanging. Okay, you may not know them,